All right, what's up, guys? Back on Southeastern 16. Flying solo again for two more SEC games to talk about in the NCAA tournament. As mentioned in the previous reaction, Chris under the weather, Max between internets at the moment. So, yeah, going to fly solo again for this one. Talk about these two games. Ole Miss holding off North Carolina, dramatic fashion. And then Vanderbilt, unfortunately, coming up short against St. Mary's after having a nice little lead against the Gales there for a bit. But we'll probably start with Ole Miss because that was a wild finish. We'll let some of you guys hop in here and do that. But again, if you're jumping in for the first time, haven't watched the channel before, hit that subscribe button. We do this for all the SEC teams in the NCAA tournaments, and still quite a few there, even though quite a few of the underdogs have come up short. Ole Miss was an underdog. Don't forget that. As a 6 seed, they were, I think an underdog by a point and a half, something like that. So another underdog wins, just like Arkansas did against Kansas. But kind of been the story of this tournament so far. The SEC teams that have been in the underdog spot have come up short a little bit, but you've had a couple of those close spreads. I think Mississippi State was favored by a point against Baylor. And then again, we talked about this one where North Carolina had all that public backing, and the Rebels said, "We hear you," and not so fast, my friend. So, yeah, this did seem like one of those classic setups, right? North Carolina played so well against San Diego State that everyone jumped on board. I mean, everyone was back in North Carolina after this, except for some people. And yeah, I mean, it seemed like the classic overreaction to one game when everybody was talking about the same team and how they didn't belong in the tournament. And well, towards the end there, they certainly looked like they belong. But that's where, if you're Ole Miss, building up a nice 22-point lead can take you a long way when you're trying to hold on in a survive advance scenario. And that's what happened. So, yeah, to talk about this game a bit, I mean, I think, again, we've always mentioned all season long, if Ole Miss is going to make a run, it's because they have a guy like Sean Padula who can just simply calm things down a little bit, put the game in his hands, and give his team a chance to win. And he, made a huge shot there at the end. I thought Ole Miss got a little stagnant offensively. I know kind of the theme was that Ole Miss has got to step up and defend when North Carolina was making that run there down the stretch, but I thought it was just as much about their offense. There was a lot of sort of just standing, and it seemed like guys were waiting for Sean Padula to do something. But eventually, after that happened for like 3 or 4 possessions in a row, I think there was a timeout, either a media timeout or somebody called timeout. And then Ole Miss came out, got a little bit more rhythm going. That they were setting screens. They were a little bit more movement, more than just guys standing around seemingly waiting for Padula to do something. So I thought that mattered a bit there. And yeah, as Shane said here, I mean, how many of these has Sean Padula hit this season? Somebody's got to be tracking these. How many just sort of dagger threes has this guy knocked down this year? I mean, it's just, he's been what an asset for this team. And I think, yeah, I mean, he's why, as we start to look ahead, and of course we'll have the preview tomorrow for the Iowa State game, but I mean, he's the reason why we feel like they're in a position where they can keep winning here, because it is kind of leaning on the strength of him. And yeah, I mean, he stepped up big here. No surprise that he was going to be the guy to do it because he's done it all year long. And so, yeah, it's pretty wild. So, all right, I'm going to go into this a little bit more. I'm going to star this stat here from Prentice. I'll get back to that in just a minute. But yeah, back to Padula. I mean, like I said, I feel like he was kind of the guy that got him calmed down there at the end. And North Carolina making the run wasn't surprising. I mean, again, this is a team that the streakiness is why they kind of, were a team that was either in the tournament, not in the tournament, and all that. So, I mean, we saw the good of North Carolina this season. We saw some of the bad, and certainly we all leaned in on the good that we saw against San Diego State on Tuesday night. But, yeah, just did not start that way. And that's where, like, having that great start was so important for Ole Miss, because I think, yeah, I mean, that's the way I look at it too, Brian. It was sort of that pressure. It's kind of the same thing we talked about in some of these other SEC teams, whether it was Alabama or elsewhere. You started to see some of that pressure just really sort of set in, and I'm sure you can draw some of the same sort of, parallels to the way the game flow kind of changed for Vanderbilt against St. Mary's, but, a little bit different situation, whereas Ole Miss, you build this big lead, and you're just sitting there like, all right, we knew North Carolina was going to make a run at some point. I didn't think Ole Miss was going to win this game by 20, but give them credit. They found a way at the end there, got some big rebounds, I thought. And yeah, I thought that was also a key. There were a couple of those down the stretch where North Carolina had some open shots, just didn't make them. But big rebounds, and I thought that was important too. But yeah, a good win for Ole Miss. I mean, there's no other way to put it. I mean, this was, like we said, I think when you looked at this region, knowing the way North Carolina played, it became a tricky matchup. But to start the game the way they did, 8 of 20 from three, you'll take that. Dre Davis, we talked about him this year, kind of that guy that maybe doesn't get enough attention sometimes, but goes for 15 points here, had 18 rebounds, 8 rebounds, and then goes 3 of 4 from the three. So that was, a very important performance they needed from him. Brakefield, did his usual thing, had some key contributions at the right moments. And so, I thought that was also kind of important there in terms of just the overall setup. I know you guys are bringing up the ACC standing in this tournament. Yeah, we tried to give the ACC a little bit of a bump in our picks, but that was, I guess we were right perhaps in some of those scenarios in some of these games involving ACC teams. But this too I think was not getting enough attention, as Chris brings up. I think the fact that you're betting against Chris Beard, even as well as North Carolina played, I mean, I almost feel like that gave Ole Miss a little bit more to work with, because it's like, all right, everybody's going to come out, look at this from the standpoint of all of a sudden this is a North Carolina team that can make a Final Four run or something. But, we're the 6th seed for a reason. And I think that's where Ole Miss's resume, we talked about it towards the end of the season, a little bit underrated too, I think, in terms of just, the number of quality opponents that they played this year, and just kind of their performances in a lot of those. I mean, remember, this is still the team that went out and did what? Like, had the win at Alabama. A bunch of really good wins. Got a little streaky there for a while where you had them losing some close games and all that. But, I go back and I just think, man, there just really weren't a lot of games that Ole Miss played this season outside of those two at Auburn and Florida, which, I mean, right, it's Auburn and Florida on the road. There weren't a lot of games they played in where you just felt like they didn't have a chance, right? And so this has been a pretty consistent team, I think, in those spots, and that's why I think the scenario down the stretch there where just calm down, cool off a little bit, and just sort of ride the wave of letting Sean Padula do his thing, that was very important. And so, yeah, I think Chris Beard had plenty to work with in terms of, potential. Everybody thinking North Carolina was just going to advance, and hey, some of us here guilty of that too. That's the case. But yeah, transition defense, Ole Miss does a great job of that. I agree. And you knew North Carolina. I mean, that was how they were going to get back in the game. They had to push the tempo. They had to try to get things going up a little bit to try to make up the ground that they found themselves in. But it just was not to be. Ole Miss made the plays, and that's again what mattered most at the end of this game. So, yeah, nice job for the Rebels. Going to go on to face Iowa State. Again, we'll have that preview of the matchup tomorrow. But I agree. I mean, I'm not going to give away my picks or anything, but not that you guys should listen to me on picks anyways. But, I think that we said with Ole Miss the reason, I mean, Chris had them in the Elite Eight, didn't he? And so it was all about the way the stylistic matchups fell for them in this part. And so, again, if North Carolina had beaten San Diego State the other night by 5, we probably all still would have picked Ole Miss and been like, all right, I may still keep that Elite Eight dream going that Max and I talked about, I feel like, for a month there for a while. So I think it's up well when you've got Iowa State down there. We'll see what happens in the other part of the bottom of the bracket. Those guys will play here in a bit. But, so I think it's it. So going to call it now. Ole Miss, there you go, beating Iowa State. That's your call. So, yep. So we'll see how it plays out there. Again, we'll preview that matchup tomorrow. But I thought really nice job from the Rebels to find a way to close out that game when really all the momentum was against them. But back to our guy, Sean Padula, making a lot of plays. And, yeah, I thought it was just an overall team effort. Everyone kind of stepped up at different moments. And you had some, like I said, big rebounds, big defensive possessions, but none bigger, I think, than a couple of those things that Sean Padula did down the stretch to win the game for Ole Miss. So, Old Guards, march on in March. And, agreed, Carter. Iowa State, Lipscomb was kind of I don't want to say necessarily a popular upset pick, but they were a trendy thought of the 3-14s that could happen. But, yeah, Iowa State looked pretty good today. So, that will be. I do think that's going to be a fun matchup in terms of two coaches who know how to coach them up on defense. So we'll see how it plays out, but don't underestimate the two teams offensively either. So yeah, Iowa State got that 27-point win against Lipscomb today. So that will be your matchup coming up, and we will preview it, as we said, heading into that matchup on Sunday once we find out when that's going to happen. Yeah, I mean, this is true. I mean, the sense of urgency, North Carolina could have won this game, but they didn't have that sense of urgency early. And Ole Miss was the aggressor, came out, took control of the game, and as I said on commentary, you cannot do that. You can't put yourself in that kind of hole in NCAA tournament play. So, that's interesting. But all right, let's see. There was a stat I know Princess brought up earlier. Let me get to it, and then we'll quickly talk about Vanderbilt for a few minutes. Statistic for you: in the history of the NCAA in the tournament teams, that were up 15 points or more at the half are 200-1. The one who lost being Alabama, who lost to South Alabama. Wow, they're up 15. Yep. Okay, that's interesting. Very interesting. So yeah, that's kind of one of those you would think. Come on, it's got to play in your favor, right? And luckily it did for some of this. But all right, let's talk about Vanderbilt for a second, because the Commodores seem to be in position too to advance, right? And it was not meant to be. And I think that's a frustrating loss for Vanderbilt fans, knowing that even though all the talk, I think if you start to look ahead and look back, it's going to be, well, people didn't think they were ever going to be here, right? This was a team that overachieved this season and, was not picked to be in the spot. But, that doesn't mean a whole lot right now. Like, you got here and felt like you were in a position to win this game. And I think the frustrating part, too, for them is that, they lose their final 4 games of the season. They lost that game to Arkansas at home. They lost at Georgia, lost to Texas in the SEC tournament, and now lose this game. That's frustrating because, remember, that was a team that had all the momentum. It played their way into the tournament. After they beat Missouri in that overtime game, we're like, they're a lock. And, turns out they were. They wind up getting in as a 10 seed and all that, even in losing 3 straight games heading into the NCAA tournament. So I think, this is frustrating because we said it, St. Mary's stylistically is one of those teams that, man, it's hard when you get into the grind of having St. Mary's just halt the game, slow you down a bit. That's what they do, right? And I think it was one where it's probably frustrating for Vanderbilt fans to look at this and feel like there were a lot of opportunities here that they had to maybe try to close this game out. They were up 7 at halftime. What was it? I was looking at the ESPN win probability sheet at one point, trying to see exactly what that number was. Because really, otherwise, like the statistical stuff, there's not a ton necessarily that's going to completely jump out at you. There are some things, but there's not a ton there. But I think Vanderbilt let me find the ESPN chart here, with about 14 minutes to go, had like an 85% win probability. And you just think about all the things that sort of changed from that point on. And it just, again, St. Mary's kind of got back in their way. And I think the one thing, too, and I've seen Vanderbilt fans bring this up, it's surprising to me that they were as successful as they were this season and did not shoot the ball as well as we thought they would. They wind up being a team that shoots 32.5% from 3, which is 244th nationally right now. That's the one surprising thing I think about Vanderbilt, is that they just did not shoot the ball as well this year. And that kind of came back in this game too, where, they wind up, what was the final number? I think they shot 30.8%. So they go 8 of 26, 30.8%. Yeah. So only got to the free throw line 7 times in this game, which that I don't think was a huge surprise. Got out rebounded by 13. That was the one glaring thing we said that kind of does stand out in a game like this. But, did their thing, right? Didn't turn the ball over, forced some turnovers. You weren't going to force probably a ton against St. Mary's necessarily, although we said if they were going to win this game, that's what they had to do, but just didn't get a lot of those extra opportunities. So, I think it's frustrating. I think if you're a Vanderbilt fan, you probably should be a little frustrated with the way this game played out, because you felt like you had your opportunities to win it. But, St. Mary's just, they played their style. And rarely do you see two teams finish with the exact same field goal numbers. Both teams go 22 of 55 from the floor in this game, but there were a couple of those things, as we said, that wound up being the difference in this one for St. Mary's to advance. And, I think if you do look back on the season, like I said, I think Vanderbilt, they went further than people thought they would in terms of making it to the NCAA tournament. But, I mean, you got to give Mark Byington credit for that. I mean, you can't just sit here and look at it as a lost season. It will feel disappointing to finish the way they did, but I still think overall, I mean, this program has way more positive momentum than it's had in a while. And, I think it's going to be one where it's all about getting players, right, in the transfer portal and all that stuff. And they put together a roster this year pretty well, I think, for a new coaching staff. And now you just got to keep, doing the same thing everyone does every offseason, right? You just got to keep getting players and putting your team in the right position. So I'm curious to see kind of what Mark Byington does with this roster heading into the offseason. But, yeah, overall here, Jason Edwards, what a great season he had. He goes for 18, went 8 of 18 from the floor in this game, but no one else in double digits for Vanderbilt in this one. And like I said, that's where, man, just adding that extra shooting element. Tyler Nickel did go 3 of 8, but no one else hit over 1-3 outside of Edwards. So I think just grabbing another shooter or two, that's how you are able to, I think, beat a team like St. Mary's, but they just couldn't make enough shots in that one. So frustrating finish for the Commodores, but hey, program in a better spot right now. Getting back to the NCAA tournament, we'll see if they can build on it here moving forward. No, Brian, Chris and Max did not take a potty break. Chris under the weather, Max between internet. Max should be back tonight for the next one, which we'll do after Kentucky and Troy. So Florida Norfolk State plays tonight. Kentucky Troy plays a little bit around the same time. So we will be back on after that group of games finishes. And then, of course, the late night game is Oklahoma-UConn. Don't know that we'll do one tonight because that may be a pretty late finish. If Oklahoma wins, though, we might. You know how that works. We'll be up watching it. So, so that's kind of our plan on that, Brian. I know you asked about the next reaction show too, but that is the plan. So, all right, let's get some couple comments. Again, guys, I'm not going to get to as many as we usually do because I'm flying solo here. But let me grab a couple here. I know some people are asking, so if Kentucky loses, the Pope get fired? Asking for a friend. I don't think that's the case. But Midwest Picker jumping in to say, Sean Padula, no fear in the pressure moments. That's why Ole Miss is marching on in March. He is just, what an unbelievable player that dude is. He is just as confident as it gets, never gets fazed by anything, it seems. And so, came up with some big plays in that. So, win Oklahoma wins. All right, there you go. An SEC team's got to knock off UConn. If they don't, then UConn's going to be in the Sweet 16 because we assume it's Oklahoma first and then against Florida in the second round should the Gators beat Norfolk State. So, someone asked what the SEC's record was in the tournament. I think, is this right? I think this is right. I can't keep up either. It's like, I don't mean that like in, a demeaning way. It's just like, hey, the SEC has 14 teams, and I'm trying to keep up with it in my head. But, all right, so we can go through quickly the wins. So Alabama is 1, Auburn is 1, Tennessee is 1, Ole Miss is 1. That's 4. Who am I forgetting? Who else is won in this tournament? It's a lot. It's a lot of teams. So I know that's the thing, and I'm like juggling. Arkansas is 1. I think that's the other one. So is that 5? I think that's right. I could be 6. I don't know. So I'll let you guys figure out the number. But we know that Vanderbilt lost as the underdog against St. Mary's. Mississippi State lost as the 1-point favorite, I think, against Baylor. Texas lost to Xavier. We know that. Missouri lost to Drake as the favorite. That's been the biggest one so far in terms of that number. And then Georgia lost as the underdog to Gonzaga. So A&M's the one I forgot. So I think, 6-5? I think it may be 6-5 based on that math because we've still got 3 to go, right? Kentucky, Florida, Oklahoma. Yeah, so I think it's 6-5. But don't quote me on that. It's hard to keep up right now. So, there you go, Prentice. I think that's right. 6-5 so far. So, look, getting 8 to the Sweet 16 looking so good. Well, but I don't think 8 ever should have been the goal, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that was always going to be too high. We said our magic number for getting to the Sweet 16 was like 6. And so I think, that's still a possibility. But I think 8 was a pipe dream. I don't think you're ever getting 8 to the Sweet 16. And that's just not a combination of seeding, but that was more of just the play, like the way some of these teams had that were playing. Mississippi State was really going to have a hard path to get to the Elite Eight, or excuse me, the Sweet 16. Ole Miss still has a hard path to get to the Sweet 16. Any of the 8 seeds or anything like that, 8, 9 seeds, a hard path. I mean, Arkansas is still going to be the underdog against St. John's. Like, they all of a sudden, just because they beat Kansas, don't become the favorite to get to the Sweet 16. So I think, yeah, anything higher than 6, in my opinion, was that was a little too aggressive there. Because again, what the SEC is going to be judged by, and we said this, guys, like, let's call it what it is. There are already people, go to Twitter, go anywhere. Oh, look at the SEC, they lost another one. Well, again, how many games has the SEC lost? Let's knock on wood, everybody. You know how superstitious I am. So far, in the games that have been played, how many games, the SEC have been underdogs in, right? Like, we ran down the list. Like, you've had one favorite lose, a bigger favorite lose, and that was Missouri, but that wasn't, a huge number. Mississippi State as a 1-point favorite, basically a pick 'em. But then the other underdogs lost, right? Vanderbilt underdog, Georgia underdog, Texas underdog, like all those things. And so I don't remember if Texas was favored against Xavier. I don't think they should have been. Georgia, we talked about, underdog. So I don't think this is a huge thing so far. There'll be people like, well, the SEC is, at 14 and they lost this many teams already. Well, of course they did. I mean, it's just, we never, I don't think, felt like all these teams were going to advance in the first round. Mean a whole lot in terms of the conference strength. I mean, you got teams are going to lose games. So, as we said, I think I think this is right, as Brian said. Like, the teams that have been inconsistent have lost games so far. And that's why we said Missouri was kind of that. What was frustrating about Missouri is because they had been one of the more consistent teams for a while there, but they just hit the wrong stretch at the wrong time. And really, we wouldn't have put them on that list before the last couple weeks, but really, we had to after this. I mean, they were not playing well entering this tournament. And so I think you kind of had to throw Missouri in there and say, well, can we really trust them? I don't think so. Same with Mississippi State. There were great stretches earlier in the season, but by the end, I mean, that's just not, they didn't look like a team that you expected to get to the Sweet 16, especially when they're putting an 8-9 game with Duke as the one. That just probably wasn't going to happen. And the same with, Georgia drawing Gonzaga and Houston. That was Georgia's path to the Sweet 16. I mean, come on, we're the SEC homers here, but none of us are picking Georgia in that scenario to get to the Sweet 16. And Las Vegas, the bettors are not doing that either. Like, they are the underdogs for a reason. So, we'll see. I mean, again, we all picked UConn to beat Oklahoma. UConn's the favorite. Will that, SEC lose another team? Maybe. So I think this was always going to be the strength of this SEC. What to me was not just the overall number, which obviously is impressive that got in, but the strength of this SEC was going to be how many strong teams there were at the top. And that's where you will ultimately be judged. It's how many teams you not just get to the Sweet 16, how many get to the Elite Eight, how many get to the Final Four, right? That's what it's going to come down to me. That's how I'll look back at the season. Although you guys know my thoughts on this. I say it all the time. I'm like, come on. What you do throughout a 30-something game season is still, to me, going to hold value, even though to most people it's just, flush it in the toilet after the NCAA tournament, a game that's, where teams play, 6 games at most. So, I mean, I think we shouldn't just completely write off a lot of these teams and say they were overrated. But you're judged by championships. You're judged by Final Fours. And so these top teams will be judged by that, and I think that's fair to say so. But, so, all right. I think this is a good point. Like, the top 4 is really where I think a lot of this settles in. And even, again, I think you can even throw in Kentucky. And here's where this gets interesting, right? If Texas A&M advances their next game, Auburn advances their next game, let's say Tennessee and Kentucky advance through the weekend, right? Well, we know what's going to happen. The SEC is going to drop another team because those two are going to be matched up together. So, that's where, again, there will be people pushing the number narrative. But when you have this many teams in the field, that potential combination of matchups where they have to play each other, we haven't gotten any of those yet. We could have gotten it if Vanderbilt beats St. Mary's with Alabama. We could still get it if Oklahoma beats UConn to play Florida. But we just, these teams are going to run into each other at some point if they keep advancing. So that's going to bring the number down. But for now, the upper seed, like, those teams have to do what they should do. And we did the previews this morning on some of these. Tennessee's got a tough matchup, I think, against UCLA. Auburn, Creighton looked great, and Auburn did not look great I mean, so I think when you start to look at some of these top seeds, Texas A&M is going to have their handful with Michigan. That's going to be a bully ball, max bar special. So, yeah, it's we'll see how many teams advance, but that's what it's all about. We'll see if the Gators can keep their momentum going. Can the Cats get it going tonight against Troy? If you haven't watched that preview, check it out on that. And don't worry, Kentucky fans, I will do my part right after the show. I will go bet on Troy just to make sure to lock this thing in. So, yeah, but we'll be back tonight for those games. As we said, we'll get it all kind of set up to react to Florida and Kentucky. We'll have a little bit more of a clear picture after that of what the second round matchups could look like. We already know what it's going to look like tomorrow for Saturday. The SEC games are very spread out tomorrow. You got Arkansas starting off the day. Then I think you got A&M, Michigan. Then after that, I think it's Auburn, Creighton, Tennessee, UCLA. So should work well tomorrow, where we quite literally will probably have a reaction live after every single game tomorrow. That may be the case. So that means 4, and we'll see how many we wind up with for Sunday. We know so far we've got a couple with Ole Miss and Alabama. Let's see if a couple more can join that. But yeah, we did talk about this earlier. Yeah, I did hear the interviews with Stephen Pearl and Dylan Cardwell about the performance. So if that doesn't put a kick into the Tigers, I don't know what will. So, and that's why I said on the preview this morning, you can go watch it. I think there's reason to say there could be some concern at this point. I wasn't concerned last week in the SEC tournament when they lost, but when that's the focus coming out of your 116 game and you're the number 1 overall seed, I don't like that. So I think it's fair to maybe have a few questions, especially with the Creighton team who's had proven success in this tournament in recent years. So I don't think that's going to be the easiest game for Auburn by any means now. So, yeah, just something to think about. But all right, I'm gonna hop off here, guys. And here's the other point. You still don't have those whats. I'm not gonna say it, but like we still haven't had those just huge ones yet. And so from that perspective, look out in the night slate. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. All right, guys, I appreciate you humoring me. I know I'm going solo and having to talk by myself is not always the best show. But, again, Max will be joining me tonight for the Kentucky-Florida post-game reaction. So hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. Again, lots of previews up. If you want to check out all of our thoughts on Saturday's games for the 4 SEC teams playing tomorrow. And then we'll have our predictions tomorrow morning for whichever SEC teams are left getting ready for Sunday's games. So, again, guys, I appreciate you watching. Turn on those notifications so you know when we go live. And, again, we'll talk to you soon at Southeastern 16.